The views and opinions expressed in The Fact Is with Hollis Grant are those of Hollis Grant and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Droids Canada Network. Droids Canada Network does not take responsibility for any content or position produced by Hollis Grant and his show. Listener discretion is advised.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for tuning in to another edition of The Fact Is. I am your host, Hollis Grant, and on today's episode, we are looking at misinformation, disinformation in Canada. Now, the government of Canada has made no secrets about censorship, is moving ahead with censorship of the internet, is moving ahead with censorship of social media and online content. But what I want to bring out here is on the particular Government of Canada own webpage. Now, this is the headline of this particular section is Canada's efforts to counter disinformation, Russian invasion of Ukraine. But it's not only just the Russian invasion of Ukraine that it's talking to. It also highlights their plans, the government's plans, to further make sure that there's no disinformation or misinformation. We also will hear from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in regards to disinformation and misinformation. So just to go over this particular page here, it goes on to talk about how for many years the Kremlin has conducted a disinformation campaign against Ukraine by using state media and proxies. Now, if it's wrong for Russia to use state media and proxies, then therefore it must be wrong for Canada to use state media or state-funded media, such as the CBC, CTV, City TV, Rogers Communications, Global TV. Now, we have done past episodes on droidscanada.com. You can go back and look to how we have covered the $1 billion funding that the legacy media receives from the federal government. Now it goes on here, it says the Kremlin still manipulates information to try to justify Russian President Vladimir Putin's illegal, unprovoked, and unjustified invasion of Ukraine. Russia uses disinformation to 1. Try to blur the facts on the ground. 2. Divide Ukrainians and their partners, much like how Justin Trudeau has tried to divide Canadians on their vaccine status. And on a past episode, he used the terms, and we played the audio clip for you, that people that do not have a vaccine or do not take the vaccine are racist and misogynist. Those were his words. 3. Undermine support for Ukraine abroad. And 4. Try to build support for Russian actions at home and abroad. Now, we have not covered this Russian war. This is something that we will take a look into down the road. At this point in time, we're only looking at misinformation and disinformation and how that's applied in Canada. Now, the section under disinformation. Disinformation is deliberately false information. Individuals, organizations, and governments may create and spread disinformation for a variety of reasons, including 1. To gain support for their policies and suppress criticism in their own countries and around the world. 2. To profit from creating engaging yet false or misleading conduct, or to spread their own ideology or beliefs among the public. Disinformation is a major threat to democracy. It makes it more difficult to access timely, relevant, and accurate information. Democracies rely on access to diverse and reliable sources of news and information. This allows members of society to form opinions, hold governments to account, and take part in public debate. Disinformation undermines peace, prosperity, and individual freedoms. It erodes trust in democracy in times of crisis. Disinformation can be harmful. Now that is the official government stance on what disinformation is. But let's hear from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau when he's asked about disinformation and national security.
Follow-up? And yes, so there's a new report today out from the University of Ottawa regarding national security. Four former national security advisors to the Prime Minister, quote, concluding that the traditional approach to national security no longer sustainable, and that Canada is not ready to face this new world of security threats. Now, do you agree with these sentiments, and what ought to be done?
There is no question that the world is changing rapidly and getting more dangerous in new ways than ever before. When we look at the prevalence of misinformation, of disinformation, the way social media has been weaponized both by foreign actors and by people within Canada pushing extremist views, trying to foment anger and discord, whether it's extremist ideology and right-wing terrorism on the rise in Canada, or whether it's examples like the illegal protests we saw in the winter. There are a whole new set of challenges that we need to be responding to, and that's why we're working closely with our national security agencies, working closely with organizations like the Canadian Security Establishment around communications to make sure that we are able to respond to these new realities. We need to do it, however, in a way that continues to defend freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom to protest, to legally protest, while at the same time we're taking on more tools to keep Canadians safe. Because increasingly we're seeing that things that start online end up having impacts on the real world.
Now, one thing that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau did mention was free speech. Let it be clear that Canada does have speech laws. There is no such thing as free speech in Canada. There was a recent case where a comedian that was taken to court over a joke that he made about a disabled child singer. It did go to the highest court in Canada, the Supreme Court, and they ruled that it did not breach the limits of free speech. But he was taken to court over that. There are hate speech laws, and they are very vague in Canada. This is very different than the amendment rights in America. Now, the rise of right-wing groups in Canada has yet to be seen. The illegal protest that the Prime Minister was referencing was the trucker protest, where people just parked on the streets and honked their horns, essentially annoyed people, but there was nothing illegal. Now, a few banks have since apologized for having closed down and limited clients' bank accounts for their role in making a donation to the trucker protest. But those directions came from the Government of Canada requesting that all banks shut down anyone that is funding this movement or protest. But this leads to a question is, can the Canadian government and the Canadian media lie or mislead people and provide its own misinformation? Well, there is an interesting article just within the last year. Now, this is from the National Post. This is a legacy media, but the name of the headline is from October 14th, 2021, and the headline reads, "Error in Judgment," end quote. CBC Edmonton regrets mannequin's use in COVID-19 news report. And this is a fact check. Some online users said the use of a mannequin was proof that Alberta's ICUs were not busy. Now, the article goes on to say, a news report released by CBC Edmonton on how an intensive care unit operates, which featured a mannequin, was later used for other stories aired on the channel, was not filmed inside an ICU, and is not evidence that the pandemic is a, quote, scam, despite claims made online. The report, released on October 2nd, included interviews and a demonstration featuring a mannequin of how an ICU facility differs from other hospital wards. Some of the same footage within the training facility was later aired in another report about COVID-19 projections for Alberta. Some online users shared an image of the news report and claimed that the use of the mannequin was proof that ICU facilities were not busy in Alberta and that the pandemic was being overstated by the media. Another individual who shared the photograph on Twitter said, "It's called fraud because it's media. They got a pass. Look very closely." Other examples are viewable in the article. The mannequin was used to demonstrate how equipment in an ICU works and is not proof that the treatment of the pandemic has been overstated. The original full report is viewable on the CBC website and on their Twitter and Facebook pages. The headline of the article reads, "It's real, it's dangerous, what it's like in an ICU ward." The description of the clips read, respiratory therapist Crystal Granat and Christy Raymond, Dean of the Facility of Nursing at MacEwan University, explain what makes an ICU bed and ward different and what patients should expect if they end up in one. Meanwhile, CBC Edmonton released an update on its website on October 11th, clarifying that the segments of the report that featured a mannequin were filmed at a university and not in an active hospital ICU. Quote, "Some of the images in this video are from inside hospitals and as such are identified as being provided by Alberta Health Service. The other clinical footage, including video of mannequins in beds, was recorded by CBC Edmonton in September of 2021 at a training facility in the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology and MacEwan University, where students learning realistic hospital simulations." The Facebook video description clearly states that the report is an explainer of how ICU facilities operate. With so much focus on Alberta's available ICU beds, we spoke to two experts about what actually makes an ICU bed different and what patients can expect when they get moved to an intensive care ward. The footage of the mannequin also featured in a news report on October 7th. In a statement to Reuters, the CBC spokesperson said on October 1st and 2nd, CBC Edmonton ran two stories describing the realities of being in an ICU ward and the strain on nursing staff. Unable to bring our own cameras into a hospital ICU ward, we shot footage at two training facilities, which was then used for illustrative purposes. An October 1st story, which was then posted on our website. It was not clearly identified as training footage, and it should have been. We have since clarified that. It took people to call out the organization for them to admit that they did wrong, that they took footage that shouldn't have been used and merely suggested that this was in an ICU. So, the CBC, which takes $1 billion from Canadian taxpayers, from the government, is guilty by its own definition of disinformation. Disinformation is deliberately false information. Individuals, organizations, and governments may create and spread disinformation for a variety of reasons, including to gain support for their policies and suppress criticism in their own countries and around the world. The CBC, Canada's own state-funded media, is guilty of disinformation. I'd like to thank you for tuning in to this edition of The Fact Is. I'm your host, Hollis Grant, and I hope you have a great week.
Dan, what happens every Thursday?
That would be DCR Droids Canada Radio.
And what time is it on Thursday?
That's from 9 till 11 p.m.
Dumb question, where do you find it?
You find that at accessradio.ca.
And what's the best part?
It's free.